show. Here we are for another episode. And yes, if you caught the title and you're like, what is this guy talking about? My name is Justin, just in this world. And we're talking about being in this world and not of it, and what that looks like. And yes, I do think that youth pastors are an important role. No, the title is not truly how I feel. However, we're going to talk about it a little bit today. And this episode is not going to be super long. I'm going to get straight to a few points here, and I don't want to belabor the point. My hope here really is just to highlight uh, some personal experience over time, and also just point point our families in a way that we can start looking as family units at glorifying God, and how do we bring that into the way that we do church? And this is something that I think I could talk about for several episodes, and will in the future as we get to a point where it makes sense to have more guests on and do more interactive episodes. It's something we'll talk about too, because the church is something that we should be paying attention to. It's the bride, right? We are part of the church. We are the church. We don't necessarily go to church as a thing. We might have church buildings, right? But we're part of the church, and so it's important to not just continue to do church the same way over and over and over, just because that's how we've been doing it for the last a few decades. And so why would we change anything, right? Or why would we look at what we've been doing and be critical of it because we don't want to be mean, right? Well, actually, I mean, you should kind of look at the data and look back and wonder, okay, maybe there's something we can be doing differently here. No, I used to have more conversations, I think, than I cared to have about the amount of youth that leave their church, whether they've grown up in it or whether they've, joined a youth group at some point, but they leave their church body at some point, go off to college, the career world, whatever it is, and then they leave the faith altogether. Now, this is that's I mean, that's tragic. It is. Let's just call it what it is. It's heartbreaking, and the blame for this that's where the rubber meets the road, right? And I don't think that it's youth pastors' fault, and that's not what I'm getting at in this episode either. So we're going to talk more about that, but ultimately, I think we need to be more specific as to the way that we look at the things that we do and the roles that we have, as far as positions that we have within our church bodies that we have turned into careers, so to speak, and be thoughtful about what that looks like ultimately. And my main point that I'm going to drive at today is the value of family, the value of leadership within the home. From yes, you men, yes, you men, but from the father, from the husband in the household, from the parents together. Mom, you are incredibly valuable in this role, and I'm going to touch on that a bit here as well in this episode. And this is where we have to be better. We've got to be better as families, be better in the way that we do families, uh, particularly in the world that is tearing families apart. It is absolutely against the family unit. You cannot look at what's happening in the world and go, oh yeah, that side of the aisle is totally for families, and oh yeah, that makes sense to be teaching our kids, and oh sure, I want to pass my kids off to the government to raise them. Why wouldn't I want to do that? I can think of a few reasons why you might not want to do that, and yet it's a difficult thing to avoid doing, especially when everybody goes to school and we need multiple jobs to keep up with whatever we're trying to keep up with. Maybe it's inflation, maybe it's our neighbors. We've got to be honest about that as well. We can't just keep looking at cost of living increases and say that we are dependent upon that second income. We can't have a household parent or such, and that's not what this episode is about. So I'll get off the soapbox, but it is fresh in my mind, and there's some episodes coming up more, kind of some thoughts on this, but we can't keep using the same excuses over and over to justify our lack of willingness to change, willingness to maybe go against the grain, and maybe stand out a little bit. And we do need to keep in mind, as is a main theme of this podcast, if the world hates you, keep in mind it hated me first. You can read one of my personal favorite chapters of the Bible. If you have to pick a favorite, this is one of my favorites. It's John chapter 15. all of it. I love starting with the vine and the branches, and I really love how 15 ends with hey, keep in mind that the world literally hated me first. You might be doing something right here, and you've got to look at that through the lens of Jesus and the life that he lived, of course. But nevertheless, let's get back to youth pastors and that role in the church, what that looks like and what that should look like. Now, what I'd rather talk about is just what you could look for in a youth pastor. And I'm going to kind of highlight a few things I think we should be looking for in our youth pastors, because I don't think it's a position that we're going to I don't think it's a position that we need to get rid of either. As I mentioned, I have several, and by several, I mean several. I have a large network of youth pastors in my phone, uh, both current youth pastors and also former youth pastors. Actually, I was just hanging out last night as I decided to go ahead and re-record this episode with a few former youth pastors whom I absolutely love getting together with and talking, and they're all in ministry in different ways now, vocationally, and it's a beautiful thing to get together, and I love doing that. And for me, growing up, family, as I've mentioned on several episodes, started going to church when I was really young. So I basically grew up in the church, as we like to call it, and my youth pastor had a significant impact on faith, and the way that it was molded and shaped. And I would never ask that that relationship be removed. And there are many people who share the same feeling about that youth pastor in their life, because there's a relationship there that can be built. It can be very fruitful. It can be very healthy for a young person who's growing in their faith. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I've been kind of seeing, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, in a general sense, not again targeting youth pastors themselves, but our perspective around what it is that the pastoral staff is there for. In particular, when it comes down to our kids, we can't abdicate our responsibility to raise our children in the way that they should go to these people who, for maybe on a good week, are spending 2 hours with our kids, maybe. Maybe a bit more on some weeks. There's camps, and there's the weekend getaways, and there's special events and stuff. But that's not exactly nurturing of faith. It's nurturing community generally, but it's not always nurturing that faith and growing that faith, or maybe even challenging our youth to think. That's That is a skill, call it a skill, the ability to think, a skill. I don't know that I would ever refer as thinking as a skill, but it seems to be a skill that is forgotten and lost in society today. There seems to be many people who just can't stop and think for themselves. And on the devil's advocate side of this, there are many people that those of us that were raised in the church or have a heavy influence of the church in our lives as saying like, "Oh, you're brainwashed. Oh, you can't think for yourself." And that, in some cases, may absolutely be 100% true. I do think that there is a high volume of students who work their way through our ministries, and this is part of why I wanted to start this conversation with you. There are many kids that are just kind of going through the motions. They're doing the thing, and they're accepting what they're being taught because they're told that it is true. And then when somebody outside of, and this was brought up by my friend Aaron uh, in our conversation last night, actually, but we're sending these kids off to people who have more degrees, they have more letters after their name, they're wearing the lab coats and all these things, and they go, "Well, that's not true." And they're a direct authority that we're passing our kids off to that has now become this new authority in their lives that is telling them something different than what they were comfortable with in their upbringing, because we haven't prepared them to do a few things. One, actually think for themselves and understand that there are other opinions, we'll say, out there, but also to provide and give a reasonable defense for your faith. And there are some of you listening to this now who go, "Well, I don't know that I could give a reasonable defense for my faith," and that is you should change that. You should. I don't mean that I don't mean that negatively. I don't mean that as an insult. You should change that. Apologetics and understanding some of the foundational principles behind why you can believe what you claim to believe is huge. Now, not that again, like as I say that, I'm sitting here going, no, there are people who I don't know if envy is the appropriate word here, but I think in different seasons, different times, I've absolutely envied certain people because I do know people who have a ridiculously deep faith in all the same things I believe in, but it just seems to, and the way that they talk about it, the way they talk about their relationship with Jesus, it just seems so easy. And I, it just hasn't always been easy for me. I mean, I'll just put it there. And I was on the fast track myself. I thought that perhaps vocational ministry was the path that I wanted to go down, and I was spending a lot of time at church because I liked to be there. I would go there. I would work with the middle school boys for their Bible study. I started because of some shifts in leadership personnel. There was a need at one point for high school guys to get together and kind of just have some facilitation. I wouldn't say I was really a high school leader necessarily. I wasn't. How do I say that? I wouldn't say that I was like, oh, hey, as a high school student, you're now the high school leader. No, I absolutely had other people there that were staff and were pastoral and were leading me. Naturally, having some inclination towards leadership, I didn't have any problem with getting the guys together and going through a book of the Bible together, or meeting regularly, meeting once a week in the evening, and going through maybe a companion book, a Bible study book alongside of our Bible study and discussion, and just getting together and having that community outside of what other communities we might have been partaking in as high school students. So I was pretty heavily involved and really enjoyed much of that. I did, and then we had just some stuff happen, as it does. And this is not abnormal. This happens in corporate world. This happens in churches. This happens all over the place. But you have leadership in some way, shape, or form fall apart. Somebody's doing something behind closed doors that they're not supposed to be doing. And you get caught, and the light the light scatters that darkness away, and you realize, oh, you've been telling me one thing, but you're doing something entirely different. Or you've been saying these things, but your actions show something different. And in this kind of phase of life that I was in, it was really impactful for me to take a step back and go, wow, like that was really unexpected. Perhaps that's my young, naivete at that point. But what it did for me was it raised some questions and raised some serious questions, up to and including, do I even believe that God exists? Was one of my early questions that started me on a journey of just kind of walking down the road of Christianity as a whole. Do I believe the Bible is what the Bible claims to be? Do I believe that all of it came together how it is? Do I understand the canon of Scripture? Do I believe in the Trinity? Do all of like just kind of working my way through these things? And my youth pastor at the time, I asked him a question that he had he just and a part of it is probably a relationship at that time too. But he just had the wherewithal to go, man, that's a really good question. So he didn't just give me an answer, just blurt out an answer and tell me what maybe part of me wanted to hear. He actually said, why don't you spend a couple of weeks kind of researching that, read, do some study, and then let's talk about it. And and I've talked about that a couple of times in the 130 plus episodes on this podcast, but because it was really impactful for me. And I think personality wise, I needed that. It also sent me on a really ultimately positive journey, where I came through having many conversations, debating with certain college professors at that, having some argumentative conversations, not just debate, but argumentative. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for that time. I absolutely am, and that was part of what has made me who I am today. I absolutely know that. But that time went on for a longer period of time. and there are different personality types in this world, are there not? So there are many who just don't deviate that way. I'm fairly skeptical naturally. I do question, I do wonder. I'm decisive. Thankfully, I don't just sit around and question things all the time. I like action. I like to do things. So that was so kind of worked out for me. I don't know that's um, that same experience is something that can just be, put in a box and handed off to others, though. In fact, I know that it isn't. What I love is when I see a family working through life together, and I've seen that. I've seen that in church environments growing up. I've seen families that clearly they're having conversations together. They're talking about the different things together. The parents specifically are pouring into and building a relationship. And for me, for my parents, I had a great relationship with my parents uh for I mean for I think I've always had a great relationship with my parents. Obviously, like at different seasons, that relationship has changed. I did feel like I could talk about really anything, and I had great role models in my faith growing up. And I would say, I mentioned this before too. So for those of you that have been consistent listeners, forgive me for bragging on my parents again, but I would say I've seen my parents draw nearer to Jesus in the last few years than I have in my entire life. And what that tells me is a few things. It tells me that their faith is actively and continually growing. They're continually spending time in the Word together. They're praying together, and I know that because I hear about it. But it's also visible in their relationship. I've seen their relationship even grow and draw closer, despite some pretty rocky stuff happening in life over the last several years. It seems like the harder life starts to rock, the closer they get together, and um, not every couple can see that. So I'm tearing up. I'm gonna try not to do that. So let's move on. I think that's a beautiful thing, and I'm grateful and blessed, and I have that in my life. When I don't, and they wouldn't mind me saying this, we were really busy. We were super busy, and we had between myself and I'm the oldest of all my younger oldest. I'm obviously the oldest of my younger siblings. I'm the oldest of four. I got three young siblings, younger siblings, and we were a busy family for a number of years. It was just busy sports and church things, and there was a lot going on. And somehow it was managed, and we all lived to tell a tale. But there are, I think, some wonder as to whether or not we could have, and I know this for me, and so I will speak as an older brother. There are things that I look back on that I would have done differently. There's conversations that I would have been more available for, and there is there. I do wish that I would have done some things better hindsight. So to you older siblings who are living this phase of life now, be patient, be loving, and know that the things that you're wrestling with, your younger siblings probably wrestling with at a higher degree because they're coming up behind you, and so they're younger. They're seeing the same things that you're seeing through a younger, more impressionable mind, and you may be somebody that's around them more than anybody else, or at least the circles. You may be somebody who's going to the same schools as them. You might be somebody that can have a dramatic impact on them and your relationship with them, and that could be for better or for worse. And I do wish that I do wish I would have done some things differently, and I wish that I would have known that. I wish I would have been aware of that too. I wasn't. I wasn't thinking about that, and 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 I don't sit here and beat myself up about that. And I'm not blaming myself here for stuff that has happened in other people's lives that I haven't directly caused. I'm not sitting here doing that. I don't want you to do that either. If you're sitting in a similar situation than I am, what I'm calling to light here is the reality that we're at war, and we're at war. Our families are in jeopardy. Family unit itself is in jeopardy, And it's going to take some strong families, it's going to take some strong men to step up and to lead your households and to lead your households well. It's going to take some strong marriages to fight back against the world that's trying to rip marriage apart and show that marriage isn't necessary. I disagree. I 100% disagree with the fact that marriage isn't necessary. I love being married to my wife. I think it's one of the most critical decisions and best decisions I've ever made. Is it easy all the time? No. I absolutely love being a parent. I love being a dad. It is the coolest, best promotion I've ever received in my entire life. And it's the best promotion I'll ever receive. So why does this all apply to youth pastors? It's not the youth pastor's job to raise your kids. It is not the youth pastor's job to be the main pinnacle faith-based influence in your kids' life. It just isn't. And if you're relying on that individual, that's not fair, youth pastor. The ideal youth pastor is somebody who is just loves Jesus beyond everything else, who has goals in life still. Your kids need to look up to somebody who has goals and ambition. I'm not talking about a bunch of wealth and much stuff and all and being super successful in the world's eyes. I'm talking about what sort of a life what sort of values do they emulate in the way that they live? They're going to learn from, they're going to look up to naturally. Naturally, your kids are going to look up to this person because you're putting this person in a role in their life where you're giving this individual influence over your kids. You're literally gifting it. Oh, right here. This is somebody that you can look up to. This is somebody that you can trust. This is somebody you can confide in even. Okay, that's where there can be a lot of risk. There can be a lot of damage, sure. But it's also a really big deal. It's a really big deal because if you're not careful, you will make that person the pinnacle focal point in your kids' life over things of faith and belief in the way that they look at the world. The ideal youth pastor understands that they are not the parent, they are not the sole influence and should not be the sole influence over their kids that they're in charge of. They should be willing to and able to direct attention and focus and build up and edify that parental relationship, that parent guardian relationship that is there way more often, should be way more often throughout the week. Now, I get it that there are circumstances where life, the family unit, that whole dynamic, and this is definitely an episode for another time, where life is such that there's not much time spent and not much time able to be spent as a parent influencing your child. I'm thinking, I mean, there's the ships passing the night sort of family setup. There's the single parent sort of family setup where you just don't have the capacity literally because you're trying to get food on the table, pay for it, but also get it on the table and do so much. So I get that there are nuances. Everybody loves a good nuance. I get that there are nuances to this conversation. So I'm not casting a blanket prescription to anybody. I'm just calling to light what we can be doing because in those situations there are other influences as well that are available, and it's important that these things are recognized and known. And in many cases, I know that they are, and in some cases, I know that they're not, and in other cases, I know that they're taken advantage of as well. And that's an absolute travesty. I can't think of I can think of a few things. There are a few things more detestable than the idea of a hardworking single parent just, okay, we're going to church and, hey, here's youth group. I'm going to get you a youth group and drop you off a youth group and to find out that some adult volunteer or even the youth pastor themselves has been grooming this child for who knows what because they know that there's a vulnerable situation there. Yeah, I'll just call it out right there, black and white. There is a lot going on in this world, and this is why we can't just be like, oh, hey, cool. Oh, I can take a deep breath. I got a break. I'm going to go sit in service, drink my cup of coffee, listen to the sermon, not scroll on my phone too much, not check the football game too much, but I'll get some notes out of it and I'll, say hi to a few friends. I won't actually build a relationship with them. I'll just kind of touch bases because we all sit in, the same chairs, same rows usually every Sunday. So they're my pew friends. They're the people I see. And then I'm gonna go about my way and live my life. Yeah, that sounds like a pretty harsh blanket judgment, but um, mm, I don't I don't think that that was so harsh. I don't think that that was so. But it might be in your face, and if you're feeling convicted by that, then excellent. You can change. Welcome to the club. I'm totally guilty of just showing up and just sitting down and sitting in the same section week after week after week, saying hi to the same people, not communing, not actually talking, not engaging with the body of believers that I have a privilege to even be spending time with. Totally guilty. I'm not sitting here going, hey, you should do this. And I've never had a problem with that. I'm totally, this is where we can be better. We can do a better job being the church. The ideal youth pastor is someone who knows and recognizes that, who loves the body more than themselves, who loves the body of believers, who loves the church, and probably has greater aspirations, maybe beyond youth pastoralship, but maybe not. I'm not looking for a career-driven person here for the role of a youth pastor. I'm looking for somebody who aspires to see families come together and aspires to see strength and unity within families that are showing up to church and the family of believers at that. So we've got our individual families that are showing up, and then you've got the body of believers that's meeting in this church building, the strengthening here and recognizing that that is a very important and significant role. It's not all about games and fun. It is about teaching, it is about preparation. And so here's what I would personally like to see more for our youth in particular in this youth pastor side of things. I would like to see more apologetic focused teaching. And I know that that's like, oh, but I mean, it's like it's hard. And it's not really. And I know that there are some out there that are really great at equipping. In general, the youth pastor role is often somebody who's young and full of life as well. Not all the time, but oftentimes, and might be a bit closer as far as the dynamic goes with the students as age range. I've met youth pastors who I'm like, what are you even doing? You're hardly even not a youth yourself. And that's again at the end of the day, it's not a deal breaker. It's just a wow. Okay, I'm going to in charge all of these high school students to look up to this 20-year-old who was literally just in high school a couple years ago. Like there's life to be lived here, but again, that's not a deal breaker. It's just an eyebrow raising sort of thing, right? You sit back and you go, well, that maybe makes all the sense in the world. Maybe it works out great. Maybe not. There's just there's a lot of there's a lot of opportunity there, right? Uh, for for nothing at all and for something great. It just depends on the individual and the person and the quantity of students to a degree, but there should probably be a bit more of a separation in that naturally. As someone who is willing to talk about what's happening in the world from a biblical perspective and really talk about it and wrestle with it and think about it. And that is a huge thing today, and it's always been. And it's something that's really easy to pretend like, oh, we don't need to worry about that. No, we need to be talking about these things because these are the things that these kids are talking about in school Monday through Friday, all over social media. It's just they're being um well, they're being attacked is the right word for it, but it's everywhere. And we should probably be more willing to talk about it. And I'm speaking from somebody who has grown up in the Pacific Northwest, and at that a liberal leaning area of things, where there's plenty of conversations that could be had that aren't being had. Why? Well, we don't want to push anybody away. Of course not. Why? We want to tell the truth. Truth with love. I don't. We don't need uh, to chase people away. That's not what I'm saying, but there is truth. Like we would agree on that. I hope if you're in a pastoralship and you think that truth is relative, then you should probably find a new career and maybe read your Bible. But outside of that, there is a level of equipping that can happen here. And I'm going to pause real quick and jump right back to the parents. I would say the same for our parental conversations, those dinner table conversations, potentially asking questions and finding out what it is that the kids are talking about these days could lead to really, really fruitful, healthy conversation. And that's going to come from building relationship. The reason that some students feel like they can have these conversations with their youth pastor as opposed to their parents is because they feel like they have a better relationship with the youth pastor than they do parent. And this may be true in many cases. So we should look at that and we should kind of maybe look at the way that we do our household and our living and think about that. And I know, like, oh yeah, that's rich, Justin. You don't have teenagers. You're right. I don't. And realistically, I mean, I don't want my kids to grow up. I mean, how many times have you heard that from parents? I want them to stay, right where they're at. And at the same time, with every passing day, I'm more and more blown away by life and what they're learning and doing and accomplishing. And I know that these days are going to come. And so I'm going to do my best to be proactive in this and continue building and fostering that relationship as a father first, as a protector and a provider first, as somebody who wants to be a father to their kids, I suppose. And that's my role first. And ideally, if I do this semi right, and I'm not going to get everything right, I already have not done that. Ideally, I'll have a great friendship with my kids as they get older. But I'm not setting out to be their friend right now. I'm not setting out to be their best of friends. I'm not going to condone and edify everything that they want to do because it's what the kids are doing. And how many times have we seen that? How many times have we seen that happen where, oh, well, so and so has a phone and so has this and so has that. Well, that doesn't mean that you need it. And sure, I'm big talk now since I don't have to deal with that right now. But that's what our stance is currently. And that's a stance that's shared with both my wife and I. And these are things that we're talking about now. We're years away from having to have some of these conversations with our own kids and set certain boundaries. But these are conversations that we have now. And we've learned to have these conversations now by listening to others, parents who wish that they would have started these conversations earlier with each other and talked about these things earlier. We've intentionally sought out perspective from other parents who are further ahead than us to ask, to learn. We read books like this. We're in the Word regularly, volunteering consistently. We want to foster an environment where when it comes up, our kids are comfortable coming to us about anything. And knowing that they're going to get more than just, well, that's how it is. That's true because it is. Well, Dad, how do we know, how can we trust that the Bible is true? You can bet that we're going to have a conversation and we're going to look at the evidence together. Then we go down this road together. Because that's my job. I'm the pastor in my house. And I'm not going to abdicate that responsibility to anybody else. In the world that we live in, we have so many amazing resources, especially living in the United States of America. And religion is a protected right currently. Freedom of, I should say. They can't take Jesus away. They'll never be able to take Jesus away. You can take everything else away. You can't take Jesus. You can't. Yeah, you can take away our buildings. You can take away books. You can throw us in prison. You can beat us. You can kill us. You can take our life, but you can't take Jesus away. And that is a perspective that is 100% that is shared across many a nation over many a millennia. And that is a perspective that perhaps our kids need to see as well. And we can't rely on other people to do that for us. As parents, we just can't. Wrapping this up, I'm a big fan of the family pastor model if we need to have pastoral responsibilities, and if perhaps congregation is size enough that's there is a need for it. And I like that for a couple of reasons. I like that oversight over specifically the family unit, those that are growing through our church, whatever your local church body. And I like that because I think that there's more touch points for seeing a perspective over a whole family. When you got multiple kids, especially, you get a different glimpse into a family from the 5-year-old, then you do the 8-year-old, then you do the 12-year-old, then you do the 15-year-old, and so on. And being able to kind of have a touch point and a perspective over that, I think is extremely valuable. And I think that that does allow for, and depending on your church's size, maybe you don't have, a youth pastor and a children's ministry director or pastor, or however that looks. Maybe you do. Maybe size it warrants, but having that perspective over kids from birth to graduating, we'll say, gives you a different insight, gives you some different values into or a valuable look, I should say, into uh, what the family dynamic might be. And it also gives you a bit more of accountability, say, as you maybe the youth pastor listening to this, to somebody who has more of an oversight on side of the congregation, the kids and our younger generations that are growing up. Now, is a youth pastor role necessary? I think in a lot of cases, absolutely. In some cases, no. And it's like, okay, well, no, I don't think that we need to get rid of this role at all. I think it's a very important and significant role, and it can be. I also think that we need to be more cognizant of treating it like a babysitter for our older kids than well, if we are treating it like a babysitting service still, for Sunday mornings, or if we are presenting it like adult church is boring, then yeah, we have a perspective. It shouldn't be set up so that we, and this is something that I've seen and I've heard from many kids, and I've heard from some who grew up in the church and who have wandered away from their faith. And you hear this like, oh, like grown up church or big church is what it's often called, is so boring. Where are they getting where are they getting that? I don't Okay, maybe your pastor is that boring. Okay, sure. But I think it's the premise of, and it is, in some rights, it's annoying kids just picking something to complain about. Totally fair. Totally fair. Not fair for them to complain about it. It's fair for you as an adult to look and go, they're just looking for something to complain about. And there's also a demeanor and a perspective that we as the adults we create. And we've got to be interested in what our kids are learning. And also we should really pay attention to our posture towards going to church. How excited are you in the morning as you get ready to go to church? Are you obnoxious as you're trying to get the family ready out the door? Are you a dictator on Sunday mornings? How is your morning routine? These are questions my wife and I are asking ourselves now as our kids grow up and they continue getting older. What is our posture towards church? Are we complaining about the sermon all the time? Are we complaining about worship? What is our attitude? And checking our heart. That's that. I I maybe you relate. Maybe you can relate. Maybe you can't. Maybe I'm on off in left field on this. Think that I think we need to be more aware of the message that we're sending non-verbally and verbally in cases, or indirectly, to our kids. We need to be more aware of the way that we will frame something such as big church. And and make sure that we're actually interested and there to worship. And if our posture is one of worship and awe and wonder and desire, then in theory, that is what is going to be seen. That's going to be seen verbally, non-verbally, both directly and indirectly by our kids and those younger generations that are looking. If it looks like a funeral dirge when service lets out, maybe the sermon was just that depressing. Maybe we just gotta take a moment and remember that we're being watched. We're an example. And you shouldn't fake your worship. I don't think you should have to. I don't think that that should be a thing. Sure, there might be days where it's more difficult than others. Those are the days where you gotta be there that much more. So as I wrap up and kind of sum this up, this was more of a yes, I tricked you into the title. I'm gonna beat up on you pastors. I'm not. I'm not. I'm not gonna beat up on any pastors in this. Did I beat up on parents a little bit? Maybe. I don't I hope not. I hope you don't feel beat up on. I hope that, you feel that, there was some things called to light and perspectives here that we can maybe learn from and grow from and build on as the body who's coming together to worship, to praise, to lift up our King, and to lead on, to be the strong, husbands and fathers, to be the strong wives and mothers that are raising families, that are raising this next generation of warriors for Jesus' name. That is my hope and my desire. Let's call these things to light now and be willing to change, be willing to grow, and be willing to be convicted. Like, I mean, God, convict me where I need to be convicted. Reveal these things. That is a prayer that we should be praying. God, I don't want to get so caught up in the world around me and my to-do lists and my things that are just all on my plate and just overwhelming me and my job and the bills and the election and the politics and all this. I don't want to get so caught up in all this that I am lost in my own day-to-day life. That's what we will literally duplicate through our kids. And it's not the generation I want to raise. So join me in being a parent that's willing to step up to the plate, take the arrows, and lead from the front. That if you got any value out of this, I would just ask that you leave a review if you feel so inclined on whatever platform you're on. Share the show. Share it at whatever point made the most sense. If something stuck out to you, then share it from that minute 37 or minute 20. Share that with a friend. Share that with your small group. Share that, and let's raise up a generation of strong Christians, strong kids, strong adults. After all, we are and should be raising adults going through childhood, not raising children to be adult children. If you'd like to connect with the show, I almost forgot. I almost completely forgot. If you'd like to connect with the show and reach out, there are a bunch of links down below. You can click that link and you can shoot an email. It's on the other platforms here. And stay tuned for more. You can also subscribe to the Patreon as well. There is a complimentary membership option there. So you don't have to pay, but there will be some updates coming out on Patreon as well. So that'd be a great place to connect and touch base with the community.